everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
hear you.
Elaine Allensworth from the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, and I'm here with my research partners from the consortium and also research partners from the Chicago Public Schools. We have been studying the implementation of a new curriculum in Chicago for students in grades K through 12. Well, it's actually in more grades than that, but we've been especially focused on early literacy and looking at, actually, can you go to the next slide? Whoops, sorry, the next slide. Yes, we've been looking at, the rollout of this, curricular initiative to improve literacy instruction in K through 2 schools or for K through 2 students by providing teachers with high quality curricular materials and aligned professional learning. This is free curriculum available for the schools so that all schools have high quality curricular materials for early literacy instruction. The curriculum, it's available online, but there are, in-person consumable materials for classrooms and lots of different kinds of professional learning opportunities available for teachers. So we're presenting, a lot of what we've talked to this group about the rollout of the curriculum in the past, and what we've seen as teachers have been working to adopt the new curriculum, and as the district has been rolling it out. So we have just a few. We're focused on things that we have not presented so much in the past here. So it's a little bit random, I'm going to say. But you can get an idea of some of the things that we've been finding. So one of the things we needed to do, and you can go to the next slide, one of the things we needed to do this study at all was to, whoops, go back. Was this to, oh, now go forward. Doesn't want to stay on that one slide. There we go. Is to look at all the assessments that students were taking in grades K through 2 before the pandemic and after, and in the years post-pandemic, in order to be able to look at trends over time and to assess whether changes in teachers' practices, use of the resources, engagement in professional learning, whether all those things were actually having an impact on students' literacy progression. An issue that we have in grades K through 2 is that oftentimes there's not one single assessment that's given across all schools because state testing systems tend to start at grade 3. And so in Chicago, as in many places across the country, you have different schools using different assessments, and even within the same school, you might have teachers using different assessments that they feel more comfortable with. But this makes it really hard to look at trends, to understand how students are growing. And beyond that, almost everywhere, we also have students whose home language is not English, often not participating in the same assessment as other students in their school whose home language is English. But then as they test out or reach proficiency levels on the English proficiency test, then they'll move into the new system. And so this also creates selection bias when we're trying to look at trends over time, or it also creates a situation where students may be tested in multiple systems at the same time. So, in doing the study, one thing we wanted to look at was, well, can we combine all of these assessments together so that we can look at trends over time without this selection bias? And across school, compare across schools to look at what's happened. And so, we looked at the degree to which all of these different assessments that were taken in the schools are related to each other. And this is just a simple correlation table that we have here. But I show, and the relationships between the assessments are not necessarily linear, but all of the assessments are pretty strongly related to each other. So they capture different skills, they're given for different reasons, but they're all capturing skills, these interrelated skills that matter for students' literacy development. And we're able to do this because we have so many students who actually take multiple assessments in the same quarter in the same year. So all of these correlations are based on students who took different assessments in the same quarter. And again, because we don't have, a really well articulated system for grades K through 2, we have, this kind of randomness in students taking either lots of different assessments or different assessments. But the good news is all the assessments are related to each other. We do see that different assessments are stronger for some students than for others for different reasons, which I'm not going to get into here. But we were able to combine all those assessments together. And next slide. When we did that, we could look at what happened to learning, to students' literacy skills in grades K through 2 through the pandemic. And that's what this figure shows here. If you look at the black lines, those show fall, winter, spring scores for students in years prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see then in the 2020-21 school year, which is represented by the darker blue line, students entered with lower scores in the fall of both in kindergarten, first and second grade that year. This was after there were 3 months of disruption in the spring of 2020, and students entered kindergarten, first and second grade with slightly lower skill levels. Instruction was remote and hybrid throughout all of the 2021 school year. And you'll see that not only did students enter with lower skills, but they made lower gains over that school year. The next year, 2021-22, students entered with even lower skills in first and second grade. But one thing that's interesting is there was not as much summer learning slide, or setback as what we usually see as we saw during the pre-pandemic years. So they entered with lower skills, but it wasn't as low as you might have expected given their spring scores, because they didn't have that summer setback. And it could be because they had lower gains that prior year, but it also could be because there were a lot of investments in summer learning that year. While instruction was in person that year, it was a very chaotic year still with COVID. Classrooms were constantly, students were constantly being sent home because somebody had COVID. It was, a very disruptive year. And so we see gains were a little higher that year, but they were still much lower than pre-pandemic years. And what we see then as we follow students later, as Susan was saying, the students who were second graders in spring of 2022, they got the worst of all worlds, right? Because they had they had the disruptions from COVID. They experienced that all through those kindergarten through second grade years. And so, those are students that are now making their way third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, right? And it's really those kindergarten through second grade years where we see, the most growth on our ELA assessments. So we're continuing to see, the effects of that in these, more recent years as students move to those older grades. Okay, so that's test scores. And then we've also been looking, if you move to the next slide, at students' attendance and absences. As Susan mentioned, absences have gone up and they have not recovered. We see that in grades K through 2. We also have been looking at students' grades, and it's, there's this odd thing that's happening that absences are up and test scores are down, but grades actually increased. They got higher during the pandemic, and they've stayed higher too. So there are some strange things going on that we need to disentangle. But that is also, that increase that we saw with the pandemic is also starting to decline. So that's just overall what we've seen in grades K through 2 in Chicago. And so we wanted to know, well, do we see that the trends look different in schools that adopted the Skyline curriculum, the high quality materials along with the professional learning? So if you go to the next slide, What we have here is a figure that just shows descriptively what we see in the data. We did difference in difference analyses to look at trends in test scores and attendance and grades for schools that adopted Skyline and those that did not. And what we see is very similar to what you see in the descriptive figure I show here, where the schools that adopted Skyline actually showed stronger growth, but that growth did not become significantly different until the third year. So it took time for schools to to show improvements in students' outcomes. Um, and so we do see by the third year of the initiative, the Skyline adopting schools showed stronger test scores for students. And that is pretty much completely driven by schools that not only adopted the curriculum, but also participated in professional learning at very high levels, or at some of the highest levels that we see in the district. So schools that adopted the curriculum and participated in professional learning, those were the schools that saw improvements over time. We also see that I showed there was a slight decline in course grades in these post-pandemic years overall, but we don't see that in the schools that adopted Skyline that had high rates of teacher professional learning. We did not see anything consistent in terms of attendance. Next slide. Okay, so we do see, some benefits from, adopting the curricular materials and participating in the professional learning, but it took time. And so, if we're thinking about, planning for the future, one thing we definitely see is that, implementation of this big, large-scale, curricular initiative requires continuous improvement both at the district level and at the school level. So at the district level, the district and the curriculum program leaders, they use feedback to continuously modify the resources and the professional learning to address what wasn't working and to make things easier for teachers. So that as school teams were using the resources, the materials and the professional learning became better and better over time. We also see that teachers really needed professional learning and support, at the school, so the school embedded professional learning, they felt was much more helpful than centralized professional learning. So it was really sustained over time. So it's this idea of, you have to be continually working to improve, getting feedback from others who are also, knowledgeable about the aims of the new resources and where you're trying to go in terms of instructional practices. And the district is clear that, this really meant integrity over fidelity. So it's not about everyone doing everything the same way. We know that doesn't work. Everyone has different contexts. They have different strengths. But the idea of, knowing what is really integral in terms of high quality literacy instruction and then working to make sure that you're implementing with integrity. And this was often, accomplished, again, with the in-school professional learning, either through instructional coaches or collabs where teachers were working to support each other. Next slide. We also saw that school leaders are really key for success, that when you had strong support from the building leader, then teachers were much more likely to participate in professional learning and then much more likely to adopt the materials and to say the materials are useful. And so that means being really strategic about, increasing the capacity of teachers through the way that you organize their work. That means, making sure that you're supporting teacher collaboration, protecting shared planning time, having school-based Skyline-focused professional learning routines. And you can do this in different ways, but you need that time, you need, that staff that's dedicated, and you need those structures so that teachers can collaborate. Next slide. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning and what I was saying, besides, understanding what's, kind of worked and what was helpful with rolling out the curriculum, just, all of our work looking at the assessments really, you know, kind of highlights for us the need for really a unified K through 2 assessment system. And that's, I think, true in so many places across the country, because we know that ELA scores grow the most and provide the most information in the early grades. In the later grades, the measurement errors are like larger than the amount of growth that students experience, in a quarter or even a year sometimes. But in the early grades, students are really growing a lot. And so you get more information. But because we have students kind of moving in and out of different systems, we're really limited in the degree to which we can use the assessments. But the fact is, these assessments are all measuring, these different skills that students need to become strong readers. And what we see when we look at these assessments is we really could probably develop a unified system. It doesn't necessarily mean students taking all the same tests, but where we understand how the tests are related to each other so that we can follow students over time and we can look across schools and we can really think about, what are the assessments that are going to give us the best information for different groups of students. So we have consistency and we have better measurement and we don't have students taking lots of different assessments. Um, so we have an infographic that we've put out. We're writing a report on the implementation of Skyline. We have some articles that we've been writing. One will probably come out soon on aligning the K through 2 assessments. We'd love to really kind of do follow-up thinking about how we, could really, think about, having a more coherent assessment system for literacy in grades K through 2. We'd also, want to think about how we, the district is thinking about, improving, materials for differentiation for students with the lowest tested skills and supporting professional learning around that, and then extending the study to grades 3 through 5.